we tend not to appreciate the amount of the crisis we were in the late 1790s over this battle with France, and we had an undeclared war with them. And the Federalists in Congress and Adams adopt these statutes. And the standard is remarkable under the Sedition Act that you're not allowed to say anything or print anything that would call the government or the president into disrepute. Now, you couldn't tell a joke about politics with that standard. And they started putting editors in jail. And Jefferson and Madison were terribly upset about this, both for principle and also political reasons. And they had to look around for how do we stop this. Congress wasn't going to work. The presidency was in the wrong party's hands. The courts were, every judge had been appointed by the Washington and Adams administrations. They weren't going to get a hearing there. So they turned to the states. And they drafted the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. And I need to be very specific about this. Jefferson drafted the Kentucky resolution, which goes too far and uses the term that the state can nullify federal law. Madison drafts the Virginia resolution. They actually do it separately. And it doesn't quite go that far, although he goes right up to the line. He uses the term that the state can interpose. They're adopted by the state legislatures with some changes or amendments. And they ask for all the other states to join them, and none of the other states joined them, which is a bad moment, I think. And I think 10 states actually repudiate them. Other states simply refuse to adopt them. So they're stuck with this sort of messy political thing, and they end up, Madison goes into the Virginia Assembly, he gets elected, and he writes a report. It's his report of 1800. It's a very underappreciated document, I think, and it has some wonderful passages in it. He does two things. One is he tries to basically bring Jefferson back from the ledge and say, the states have a role here, they have a voice in constitutional interpretation, but he stays away from nullify, he stays away from the notion that the states can change federal law. But the other thing he does is he says, and you're missing the point, which is the inhibition on speech. And he talks about speech in that report, and God help me, I'm going to use the actual language because it's so good. It's very modern language. He says, the press alone, checkered as it is with abuses, the world is still indebted to it for all the triumphs which have been gained by reason and humanity over error and oppression. That's pretty full-throated defense of free speech. And he anticipates the whole chilling doctrine, which courts didn't get to for a century. It's better to leave a few of its noxious branches to their luxuriant growth than by pruning them away to injure the vigor of those yielding the proper fruits. And I think that's very powerful stuff. And he really was way ahead of his time in his appreciation for the importance of these activities. And it became snarled up with the federalism issue, which we still get snarled up in. But I think on the speech issue, this was just the most powerful statement.
Sometimes we forget, in the burst of self-congratulation that we like to engage in as a nation when we talk about free speech, we forget how truly profound the Alien and Sedition Acts were as an act of censorship. President Adams, trying to hold on to power, locked up 17 of the 20 newspaper editors that opposed his re-election under the Alien and Sedition Act. The only Jeffersonian congressman from Vermont, Matthew Lyons, who was also a newspaper editor, was jailed for 4 months for criticizing.
And re-elected from jail.
And he was re-elected from jail, and he got the final word because he then got out, was re-elected, sat in the Congress that voted to make Jefferson president, and essentially voted to end Adams' reign. So he had the fight. It was a wonderful poetic justice. But Madison is fighting both publicly and behind the scenes, trying desperately to end this. the lesson I take from this, which is a very powerful lesson, is that you can't use originalism to read the First Amendment. Because if you really want to be an originalist and go back and recapture what people thought the First Amendment protected, Madison was talking in the modern voice, but he couldn't get a federal judge to go along with him. Indeed, the federal judges were commencing the prosecutions themselves. He couldn't get a federal judge to go along with him. He couldn't get many people in Congress to go along with him, and he couldn't even get his allies in the states to go along with him. So that it shows the weakness of the free speech principle at the time of the founding, but it also shows Madison's remarkable prescience that you can't have a democracy unless you have free speech. I mean, that's why speech follows the religion clauses. You have the religion clauses in the First Amendment, and then freedom of speech is next, because that's the articulation. And then press is mass articulation. And then assembly is collective action. And then petition is actually putting it into law. So he's writing the arc. He's writing the odyssey of a democratic idea that starts in the conscience of a free person, is articulated, is distributed en masse, is the subject of collective action, and it's finally passed. It's a story of democracy. Yeah. It is democracy in action.